देखो, फ्रेंच रिवॉल्यूशन undergoes through, as I said, multiple phases. It's a very long drawn process and there are multiple extremely important events in between. We will look at all the important events from the point of view of history also. I will not miss the narrative. But I will tell you one thing very honestly, do not try to memorize all the events. बिकॉज उसकी कोई जरूरत नहीं है. मैं आपकी कल की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ. मैं अदरवाइज बोल रहा हूँ कि फ्रेंच रिवॉल्यूशन में not from every area questions are asked. They're asked from some specific areas or some generic areas. But to understand the entire theme, we have to look at everything. But almost like let us say, for example, we're looking at phase 2 and phase 3 today. From phase 2 and phase 3, you will come across many, many events which will be new, which will be exciting, which will be important to understand the history of French Revolution. But hardly anything will be useful from the point of view of answer writing. तो आज के दिन में जो कहानी देखेंगे, just for the sake of understanding, there are only two areas which are worthy of asking questions, and so far not a single question has been asked. तो पूछते भी है तो बड़ा आसान पूछेंगे. And if they ask, we know what they will ask. We know we have been able to extract the themes. So thematically भी उसमें क्या लिखना है पता है. But I cannot skip the in between stages and go to immediately Napoleon की चलो वो कहानी देखते हैं. ऐसे नहीं कर सकते हम. So substantial part of today's lecture is to understand the story, but very less part of it is from the viewpoint of answering the questions. तो ये समझ लो. There would be lots of events, lots of new terms, or it's like a seesaw, game of seesaw. दो कदम आगे चार कदम पीछे चलता रहता है उसका. फ्रेंच रिवॉल्यूशन इज ऑलवेज रिवॉल्विंग. तो यू नेवर नो कि भाई आप आगे गए कि पीछे आए हैं. So that becomes very confusing. So understand, enjoy. Do not try to memorize. Question में नहीं. अगर हाँ, had world history been part of prelims like earlier, like before 20 years ago, optional also was part of prelims examination. जीएस के साथ साथ ऑप्शनल का भी क्वेश्चन पेपर आता था प्रीलिम्स. एमसीक्यू पूछते थे. वो 20 साल पुराना जमाना है. उस समय ये सारे फैक्ट्स काम के होते थे. अब नहीं है. बट लेकिन समझने के लिए जरूरत है, वरना नेपोलियन समझ में नहीं आएगा. ठीक है. So let us begin. Or even before beginning, let us try to quickly take a recap of what we have done earlier. This is our third lecture of French Revolution. We'll take 4 total lectures. In the first lecture, we discussed the causes. So let me write the causes over here. And we discussed how many causes? Okay. Social cause is states wala. How the stratification was happening within social structure, social order. Then economic cause. What was that? We discussed two aspects of economic cause. One for the lower classes, the idea of Marx. One for the middle classes, the idea of Tocqueville. Right? The Tocqueville idea is more important than Marx here because the question that could be asked is कि दुनिया भर में पूरे फ्रांस में problems, पूरे यूरोप में problem था. Why the revolution happened only in France? Why not in Prussia? Why not in Austria, for example? तो यहाँ पे Tocqueville will be very important. So economic causes. Then we looked at, yes, ideology, connection between the Enlightenment and French Revolution. We looked at the 3 possibilities. This is a very important question. Then political problems, absolutism and ancient regime. And then fiscal crisis, the immediate cause. So from there, we went to the trigger of revolution. We discussed 4 phases. First was aristocratic phase. What was the outcome of the phase? The summoning of state generals. That phase was nothing but the other side of the fiscal crisis. Right? The king was not able to have his remit completely. The second was middle class phase or bourgeois phase. And in that, what happened? The States General was converted into National Constituent Assembly. Tennis court oath and everything. Then it could have been trampled over by the king with the help of army. So they got a muscle power in the terms of in the city and in the provinces. So in the city, what we have is popular revolt, popular revolution, and the best emblem of that is the fall of Bastille. And we have peasant. We call it as great fear. यहाँ तक clarity है. Then we started with the first phase. थोड़ा सा कलर चेंज करते हैं. In the first phase, we looked at certain important outcomes. अरे मैडम बहुत दिन बाद आई आज. अच्छा अभी आने बाकी नहीं आए ना, आ जाएंगे. So what were the important achievements of the National Constituent Assembly? 4th of August, night of 4th of August, 5th of August. So end of feudalism. Then 26th of August, Dr. Mack, Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Then we also saw in between Women's March. Although अपने story के line में नहीं चलता है, chronologically it happened over there. But if you want to talk about the popular aspect of revolution, then you have fall of Bastille, you have the great fear in the various provinces, and you also have Women's March. It's an aspect of popularity, popular force that was at play during revolution. Then we looked at उसके पहले भी administration plus judicial over structuring, economic, we talk of assignments and everything. It's a bourgeois, so therefore you have property being important, free trade, all those things. The grain trade was freed. Then we looked at religious. Here the main aspect was the civil constitution of clergy, and church was sought to be delinked from Pope and made the department of the state. And finally, we looked at the constitution. And if a question is asked only on this constitution, we mix all these things together. Now, ये areas जो है, for example, a question could be on all the causes together. A question could also be only on economic causes. The disjuncture between the class and order. क्लास एंड ऑर्डर मतलब हमने देखा था हर क्लास सोशल ऑर्डर के अंदर कैसे अपर लोअर क्लास बन रहे थे. दैट कुड बी अनदर क्वेश्चन. सोसाइटी इज चेंजिंग. अ क्वेश्चन कुड बी ऑन ओनली आइडियोलॉजी, और क्वेश्चन कुड बी ऑन द रिवोल्यूशनरी एटमॉस्फियर, जहाँ पे सारी चीजें आएंगी. स्पेशली ये एंड वाली चीजें अधिक आएंगी बिकॉज ऑफ व्हाट आर द इवेंट्स हैपनिंग एट दैट टाइम. सो द कॉजेस आर वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फ्रॉम द क्वेश्चन पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू. देन वी लुक्ड एट द ट्रिगर इवेंट्स. यहाँ पे स्टैंड अलोन क्वेश्चन कुड बी ओनली एंड ओनली, अगर पूछा जाए तो रोल ऑफ मिडिल क्लास. बट व्हेन अ क्वेश्चन इज आस्क्ड ऑन रोल ऑफ मिडिल क्लास, you not only talk about tennis court oath and everything, you connect that with end of feudalism, Dr. Mack, constitution, ki how the elements over here, even economy, how the elements over here are pro middle class, right? A question could be on the specifically fall of Bastille. I had not predicted the question before, but this year perhaps there's a possibility, or next year maybe, because of India-France relationship, this event was discussed in newspaper a lot. The fall of Bastille forms a question in itself. We have looked at the historiography of that event also, especially, right? याद है? देखिए मैं लिखवाया था historiography analysis. So these are the areas. Then once you come to first phase, you can have an independent question on the effectiveness of the end of feudalism. We have seen that as well. We can have an independent question on the Dr. Mack, Doro Mack. Dr. Mack can be compared with American Bill of Rights also. We have done that also very briefly. And then you can have an independent question on the overall achievement of the first phase. This question is as equal to this question only. Constitution के बारे में बताओ. So ये phases were very important. Now we enter next two phases on which the questions are less possible. There are only couple of areas, हम वो अभी देख लेंगे. And then we go to Napoleon. So therefore, many teachers generally, or many books also, actually not mention the second and third phase in quite details. But हम कर लेंगे. कि होता क्या, हम किताबें पढ़ते हैं, कभी नोट्स पढ़ते हैं और परेशान हो जाते हैं कि भाई इवेंट्स चल क्या रहे पता नहीं होता. तो यू शुड नॉट बी रिक्वायर्ड टू रिफर टू एनी अदर सोर्स फॉर दिस पार्ट. तो हम एक जगह सारा देख लें. नाउ वी एंटर द सेकंड फेज एंड द थर्ड फेज. But before going to second phase, we have to see ki what was the outcome of the first phase. They inaugurated the constitution. They operationalized it. And then, as I said, they committed two mistakes at the end. One, because it was the constitutional monarchy, the king had a scope to stay awake, stay alive, like in the case of Britain. But he was not patient. He was irresolute. He was weak. He was suspicious. He did not invoke any trust with the people, and therefore some of his actions led to his own downfall. Constitution also failed. राजा ही नहीं है तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन कैसे चलेगी? You have to change the constitution. The second problem that happened, जो गलती रही of the constituent assembly, that they बहुत ज्यादा उदार बन गए कि भाई हमने बना दी असेंबली, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बना लिया, now will not get elected. हम सारे legally disbarred from fighting elections. Now let the new people come in and run the government. इतना उदार नहीं होना है. It is the responsibility of the first generation which drafted the constitution to make it work also. In India, we had the assembly which formed the constitution. Most of them got elected in the first Lok Sabha and some of them also in the second Lok Sabha. अगर वो नहीं होता तो कौन से लोग आते और क्या करते? We have no idea. It could be better, could be worse, but it's generally worse because these people are inexperienced. Experience matter करते हैं. Because of two reasons, things started falling apart. तो जो falling apart वाला part है, अब हमें वो देखना है, which will connect the decline of first phase and emergence of second phase. The most important event that leads to the end of first phase is the regicide. Regicide मतलब राजा की हत्या. And that was a very big thing. Very big thing. For centuries and centuries in entire Europe, the nation, the people have never come together to execute the king publicly, saream. And that is a threat. That is a very important. ये ऐसे रातों रात नहीं हुआ है. As we see, it was not with what the revolution started. Revolution never intended to go for the republic. If you ask in 1789, हार्डली किसी हिस्टोरियन ने भी कहा है पूरे पेरिस में आप चलते 10-15 लोग गिने चुने मिलते जो कहते हमें रिपब्लिक चाहिए. 99.99% people wanted constitutional monarchy only, unlike America. But in the matter of couple of years, everything changed. And now suddenly, what you have is a republic. So a transition from constitutional monarchy to republic happened because of multiple reasons. वो हम पहले देखेंगे. ठीक है? Let's start with, on the basis of the Constitution of 1791, it is the first constitution. There was a formation of unicameral legislature after the election of 1791, in which the old people did not stand. The assembly thus formed was divided into two groups, rightist and leftist. Now you start seeing the emergence of the political ideology. This right wing, left wing are the terms which have come from this assembly for the first time in this universe. राइट विंग कौन थे? जो स्पीकर के राइट में बैठते थे. लेफ्ट विंग कौन थे? दोज यूज्ड टू सिट ऑन द लेफ्ट साइड ऑफ द स्पीकर. व्हाट वाज द स्टांस ऑफ राइट विंग? मोनार्किकल. पूरा राजा रहे, परंपरा रहे, बैकवर्ड लुकिंग. दैट इज राइट विंग बाय डेफिनेशन इन द यूरोपियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट. एंड व्हाट इज द लेफ्ट विंग? डिस्ट्रॉय द किंग, डिस्ट्रॉय द ट्रेडिशन, डिस्ट्रॉय द रिलीजन, गो अहेड, प्रोग्रेसिव, वेलफेयरिस्ट, डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन, प्रो पुअर, प्रो पीपल, नॉट एलिटिस्ट. राइट विंग इज एलिटिस्ट. आज के दुनिया के संदर्भ अलग है. इन 21st century, राइट एंड लेफ्ट इज डिफरेंट इन इंडिया. नॉट लुक फ्रॉम दैट लेंस. ठीक है? प्योर लेंस जो यूरोपियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट के लेंस है, उस लेंस की बात कर रहा हूँ. मेनी पीपल ऑल्सो से दैट राइट एंड लेफ्ट टर्म्स आर एक्चुअली नॉट एप्लीकेबल टू इंडिया बिकॉज यहाँ पे सब कुछ मिक्सचर है. वो तो अलग बात है. बट यहाँ पे वी हैव राइट एंड लेफ्ट. सो लेफ्ट वेयर एक्चुअली radical members. Now, if you look at these radical members, their number is gradually increasing. And within those radicals, we have three groups. Three groups. One is Girondist, other is mountain, and third is plain. होता क्या है ना, पॉलिटिक्स ऐसे ही होता है. You have right, you have left. Within left, you have right and left. Within that, you are right and left. मतलब हर आदमी के राइट में कोई ना कोई है, लेफ्ट में कोई ना कोई है, यही तो चलता रहता है. So all these Girondist mountains and plains were actually technically left wing. But even within left wing, the Girondists are the people who are who are more left wing, but not as much as the others. So यहाँ पे middle class was represented by the especially lower middle class, Girondists relatively less radical. So they want the king to not be powerful, but they don't want to kill the king also. थोड़ा सा बीच में लटके हुए. So if I want to draw this, you have, if this is the assembly, speaker, यहाँ पे आपका left, यहाँ पे right. In left you have Girondist, you have mountain. Extreme left. This mountain later on become Jacobin also. And the plains are actually sometimes here, sometimes here, sometimes here. Plains matlab, they are actually majority. कभी इस तरफ है, कभी उस तरफ है. Everybody is individual. By the way, understand this, these are not political parties. The word Girondist come from a province of Gironde. वहां से लोग चुन के आए थे. They are called Girondist. The word plain is called plain because वो नीचे बैठते थे असेंबली के हॉल में, फ्लोर के नजदीक. एंड माउंटेन्स आर द वन कॉल्ड माउंटेन्स बिकॉज वो सबसे ऊपर बैठते थे, क्योंकि असेंबली की कुर्सी ऐसे होती थी. तो दोज हू यूज्ड टू सिट एट टॉप आर कॉल्ड माउंटेन्स. बस इतना ही है. दे आर नॉट पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज. पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज डिड नॉट एग्जिस्ट. They had the groups. They used to socialize. They used to meet in clubs. They used to discuss. But political party concept comes up in 19th century. In the 18th century, you don't have political parties. ठीक है. अब पॉलिटिकल पार्टी बनना धीरे 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 शुरू होगा after French Revolution. Neither in France, nor in Britain, nor in America, you have political parties like this. So middle class was represented by Girondists, relatively less radicals. Lower class was represented by mountain, petty merchants, shopkeepers, dockyard workers, etc. Highly radical, and the plains were in between. They occupied centrist position. So ये हो गया उनका fractured mandate. Yet the royalist, that is the right wing, was also present in substantial number after election in the assembly. उनकी भी संख्या कम नहीं थी. So what does it say? It says that there is a possibility of counter-revolution, always. And secondly, within the left, there is no unanimity. Now, once this assembly is established, what you have is the beginning of the war. Now, war is the French Revolutionary War, the war that France starts to have with entire Europe. Now, this war is important because you will see many terms associated with it. The first coalition, second coalition, third coalition, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. So from the first coalition to seventh coalition, 7 coalitions होते हैं अलग-अलग देशों के to fight against France. From this point onwards, 1792 से लेके 1815 till the time Napoleon is gone. So at this point of time, we have only first coalition, which is important. We'll see all the coalitions one by one, but we'll not focus on which coalition में क्या हुआ, हमें चाहिए नहीं. But I'll clearly tell you which coalition is happening, doing what at what point of time. Here, it is the beginning of the first war, first coalition. तो क्यों होता है? फ्रांस के अंदर चल रहा है, चलने दुनिया को क्या करना है उससे? So the question that arises here is why the domestic change in France is indispensably connected to rest of European countries. That is the point. So while the assembly was in session, a few disturbing trends could be seen. Fear of counter-revolution. Now the revolutionaries in France were concerned about the possibility of foreign intervention aimed at restoring the French monarchy, because they were all एक दूसरे के भाई बहन थे. As I said, Leopold II, who was Holy Roman Emperor of Austria, he was the saga bhai of Marie Antoinette, who was the Queen of France. तो भाई बहन के पति को मारा जा रहा है, परेशान कर रहे, तो भाई परेशान नहीं होगा, बगल बगल में रह रहे. So, and again, revolutionaries, like in the case of France, are not present only in France. They're also in other countries like Belgium में कुछ है, कुछ पर्शिया में है, कुछ यहाँ कुछ वहाँ. They are suppressed there. They are not as powerful, but they exist in some amount. Success in one state emboldens the revolutionaries in other states also. They get momentum. तो वो भी नहीं चाहिए. So what happens? First of all, flight to Verence. Louis XVI's failed attempt to flee to Verence, it raised suspicion that foreign powers might be conspiring with the French royal family. We have discussed that Women's March brought Louis XVI from Versailles to Paris, and he was in the palace of Tuileries for a long time. Now he's unwise king, रहता आराम से, उसको राजा से जनता ने बनाया था, but ना, भागने की कोशिश किया. He was afraid for some reason. I told you story also. He changed the clothes. सलाम ठोका उसको, बताई थी मैंने कहानी आपको. So he tried to run away. He was captured, brought back. Then people think राजा पे ऊपर भरोसा नहीं कर सकते. He is in collusion with outsiders. The second thing, declaration of pillnets. यहाँ पे होता क्या है? You have the king of Austria, Leopold II, and the king of Prussia. Both of them come together and they produce a declaration. In that, they warn all the French people, whatever you want to do, it's okay as far as you are not harming the king's family, his power and his life, both should remain unharmed. So it gave a kind of threat to entire French people that the interest of the monarchy outside is connected with the interest of monarchy inside. So if you want to destroy monarchy inside, we have to fight with outside also. You see how these old things are connected to each other. गरीब आदमी दुनिया भर में गरीब होता है, भले हिंदू हो, मुसलमान हो, इंडियन हो, पाकिस्तानी हो, कुछ फर्क नहीं, गरीबी गरीबी होती है. एंड सिमिलरली अमीरी भी अमीरी होती है, राजा राजा होता है. कैपिटलिस्ट इज कैपिटलिस्ट एवरीवेयर. इट डजंट मैटर विच रिलीजन, विच रीजन, विच कंट्री, दे आर कनेक्टेड टू ईच अदर. द इंटरेस्ट आर क्लास बेस्ड. दैट इज द पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ. सो इफ दीज आर any attempt, if there was any attempt on the life of the king, the European powers would form a coalition and intervene in France. France ko khabardar. It was clearly seen as a signal for a possible invasion of France by the monarch. Monarch occult powers. The monarch, it was a wrong word. I don't know, monarchical powers maybe of Europe. Many emigres formed armed groups close to northeast frontier of France and sought help from the rulers of Europe. Now, it is not only the king, the royal family itself, but also we have lots of aristocrats and nobles and higher clergy who are under threat, whose Havelis were attacked in the popular revolution or in the peasant revolution. They are afraid of life and property. So वो कहीं जाके वहाँ के लोगों को जोड़ रहे हैं, बाहर से मदद ले रहे हैं कि हमारा सत्ता में वापस चाहिए. So those people who have run away and trying to come back to get their power again, they are called emigres. तो वो भी अपने, so all of these people together form something called as counter revolutionary force. Point here is simple, that even after forming the assembly, even after creating a constitution, the regime which is newly established is still very weak. It may survive, it may not survive. वो खुद घबराए हुए हैं कि हमारा क्या हो. And they're looking with everything with suspicion कि भाई ये तो हमें नहीं मारेगा, वो तो हमें नहीं मारेगा. So there is lot of distrust within France, within people, within classes. And that distrust is because of such suspicion, such rumors, such conspiracies, and these events add to that distrust. They confirm the distrust. ठीक है. It was widely suspected that they were conspiring with the aid of the possible upsurge of the counter-revolutionary emotions in France. When the National Constitutional Assembly proclaimed the revolutionary principle of the right of self-determination, it gave a new hope to the revolutionaries across Europe. The rulers in various countries began to worry. अब लोगों को लगा आसपास के the neighboring monarchs started to feel कि भाई these people are exporting revolution to our country also, which is wrong. तो revolution के बारे में कहा जाता है that revolution is never successful in one single country unless it is successful in every other country. So for it to survive in one country, it has to actively work for its own export. The same thing happened in the case of Russia. Russians also tried to export the revolution to other European countries. तो बाकी लोग घबराए थे. Same thing happened here. The kings feel कि भाई अपने एरिया में करेंगे. Then the kings gave one of the actual generals of the Prussian army, called the Duke of Brunswick. He gave a manifesto. He was a commanding general of Austro-Prussian army, threatened the destruction of Paris should any harm come to King Louis XVI of France. अगर दोबारा उसने कहा कि आपने राजा को कुछ किया तो फिर मैं पेरिस शहर इन्वर्ट करके तबाह कर दूंगा. He is the military general of the neighboring country. So all these things are connected to the externality of France's relationship with others. So France के अंदर भी all these things are happening simultaneously within France. There are domestic developments happening. Radicalization is increasing. So in the assembly, where you had some right wing and some left wing, and within left wing you have some center, right and left, ये proportion अब धीरे धीरे change होने लगा, because right wing became less important and left wing became more important, more vocal, more prominent, and even within left, the extreme left became even more vocal. क्यों? देश खतरे में, revolution खतरे में है, तो ये बातें शुरू होती है. So the French Legislative Assembly declared war on Austria in 1792. It marked the beginning of the French Revolutionary Wars, which would eventually invoke many European powers and have profound consequences for both France and Europe as a whole. So why was the assembly willing to go for war? Because war is not declared, despite declarations and manifestos, war is not declared by Austria. It is declared first by France. There are multiple possible causes. एक हो सकता है कि अंदर domestically they have lots of division and they want to divert the political attention to the war. ये तो हमेशा होता है. देश के अंदर दिक्कत हो, नेबर से युद्ध कर लो. It's like oldest usul in global history, world history. Every time it happens, you want to whip up some emotions within your country, pick up some war with your neighbor. Nationalism. किसी ने कहा कि patriotism is the last resort of the rascal. तो मतलब ये कहानी है, and European history comes true to it. Whenever British Prime Minister wants to get election, कुछ ना कुछ EU का इशू निकाल के बैठेंगे वो. Whenever France wants to get something, अंदर डोमेस्टिकली इलेक्शन चल रहा है, कुछ प्रॉब्लम चल, राजा अगर महसूस करे मैं वीक हो गया हूँ, बगलों से युद्ध करके बैठो, तो दैट पूरी जनता साथ में आती है नेशनलिज्म के नाम पे. इट्स अ वेरी ओल्ड ट्रिक. वन पॉसिबिलिटी ऑफ व्हाई फ्रांस वेंट फॉर वॉर itself is that they wanted to solidify some opinion and the internal crisis was to be suppressed. And in the name of nationalism, you wanted to bring everybody together. It was a good diversion also, because within France, the problems were not yet solved. The economic crisis continued. The bread was still very costly. The Parisian mob was very angry. देखो इसमें जूलियस सीजर ने एक बार कहा था कि what people want is bread and circus. खाना मिले और मनोरंजन मिले, बस लोग खुश, हम अपनी सत्ता चला सकते हैं. So if you can't give bread, give more circus. ये मैंने जोड़ा है बाद में, but anyway. So you see that not only that they wanted to unify because of the political fragmentation, they also wanted to divert the attention because they were not able to solve internal crisis. Interestingly, even the royalist faction, the monarchical faction, the right-wing faction in the assembly also voted for the war. वो भी चाहते युद्ध के लिए जाओ. ये क्या बात हुई? राजा खुद भाग रहा है वहां पे, राजा के सत्ता पक्षधर बोल रहे कि युद्ध करे. Perhaps the reason being that they thought the new regime is very weak. They don't know anything. They can't control the army fully. In that situation, if you go for war, the need of the king might arise. The king might find more scope to re-establish the power. So even the right wing supported the war. So almost unanimous voting was there, by which France declared war on Austria. Now, David Thompson, a great historian, has said very clearly, this war is not the war between the two countries only. This war is actually between the old Europe and the new Europe. It's a very fundamental idea to understand. It's not simply war between France and Austria. It was a conflict between old Europe and new Europe. What is old Europe? The monarchical Europe, aristocratic Europe, emigres Europe. And the new Europe is the new ideas of 4th of August, end of feudalism, civil constitution of clergy, secularism. अब ये आइडिया कैसे कोई मानेगा? ऐसे आराम से बिल्कुल नहीं मानेगा. Even in India today, you see lots of problems with respect to religion and politics. People don't solve the problems. The problems continue. The solution may come or may not come, but change entails huge amount of violence. उसके बिना बदलाव अच्छा बुरा दोनों आसानी से नहीं होता. So it was a fight between the old Europe and the new Europe. Therefore, the domestic revolution in France had to fight the international war. And that war is revolutionary war. Ultimately, this war will continue. It will lead to this regime collapsing. It will lead to end of monarchy, republicanism, huge amount of violence within France. It will also give scope for the rise of military in national life and rise of Napoleon within military. नेपोलियन की शुरुआत इस वॉर की वजह से होगी. एनीवे, तो secondly, David Thompson has given one more interesting quote. What happens is that these wars ultimately go for long years. In those wars, France wins multiple times. It controls almost entire Europe. And once it captures one region, वहां पे जाके फ्रांस अपने क्रांति के प्रिंसिपल्स को फोर्सफुली टॉप डाउन इंप्लीमेंट कर. तो फॉर एग्जांपल एबॉलिशन ऑफ फेडरलिज्म एंड फ्रीडम ऑफ सर्फ्स. तो सर्फ को छोड़ना है, पिजन को बनाना है, तो भाई ऑस्ट्रिया में अपने आप नहीं होगा. तो फ्रांस जब ऑस्ट्रिया जीतेगी, कुछ पार्ट ऑफ ऑस्ट्रिया, वहां पे इसको एनफोर्स करेगी. नेपोलियनिक कोड, इट विल बी एनफोर्स्ड ऑन दोस कंट्रीज. सो व्हाट वाज द बॉटम ऑफ रिवॉल्यूशन इन फ्रांस became top down revolution in the rest of Europe. So revolution led to war, and war led to further revolution in the rest of the Europe. That is why it is a tussle between the old Europe and the new Europe. समझ में आया? That war is so, because I am deliberating upon that little bit in detail, because when I studied, I was not able to understand कि भाई अपने देश में क्रांति को और दुनिया से क्या करना है आपको. But these things are intricately connected. That connection had to be explained, because युद्ध क्यों हो रहा है ये पता ही नहीं चलता. शायद आपने पहले फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन पढ़ी होगी. You also might be confused कि भाई वॉर क्यों हो रहा है यहाँ पे. आप थे confused? नहीं थे. Anyway, now you have, as the war situation is developing on the border, you also have increasing radicalization within the country. So domestic development, the fear of conspiracy of the émigrés nobility and the monarchical powers that counter-revolution threatened the revolution gradually led to political radicalization. For example, in Paris, the common people, the commoners, the sans-culottes, they go and they form their own commune. It's the first instance of Paris commune. मतलब लोगों ने अपना गुट बनाया है, हम अपना शहर खुद चलाएंगे. And even the legislative assembly is forced to recognize that these people will run the city of Paris, and they take decisions. The decisions are more radical. ये कौन लोग हैं? Commoners हैं, hungry people. I am not purposefully using the word working class, because working class is the outcome of industrial revolution which is yet to happen. Artisans, craftsmen, shopkeepers, petty bourgeois, some of them are dock workers. They are workers. They are artisans. They are craftsmen. But still, we don't use the word working class, because industrial revolution अभी होनी बाकी है, वो बाद में देखेंगे. After this entire revolutionary episode is over, then will come industrial revolution in France, and then we'll have emergence of working class. The terms that we use is sans-culotte, or lower class. Okay. So they form the Paris Commune. The economic crisis continued, and it gradually worsened. The king's attempt to flight to Verona, as I discussed, that led to increased suspicion even within. So within the assembly, जो लोग थे वो और थोड़े vocal हो गए. The war was continuing. It had started well for France, but very soon it started going against France. It deepened the passion and sense of urgency among the various factions. There was widespread belief that they had been betrayed by the monarchy. युद्ध गड़बड़ क्यों हो रहा है? क्योंकि हमारे राजा गद्दार है. Think of this statement, राजा गद्दार है. Just 100 years ago, राजा ही फ्रांस है. अब राजा गद्दार कैसे हो सकता है? मतलब for the first time people are thinking that we are the nation. King is not the nation. Popular sovereignty. Anyway, so how do we see these things unfolding? You have, for example, some events which led to the political breakdown. First is the August insurrection. The people decided to act. They attacked the Tuileries palace जहाँ पे राजा रहता था, and where the king lived. 600 royal guards were executed or killed, The king left the palace and took refuge in the assembly chamber. The assembly decided to suspend the king for the moment. Again, it is not the middle class. जनता ने भीड़ जमाई, भीड़ ने हमला किया, 600 गार्ड राजा के पैलेस के अंदर मार दिए, राजा जान बचाने के लिए भाग के बैठा अंदर पार्लियामेंट के अंदर जाके. नाउ द पार्लियामेंट इज सेइंग कि okay, I will give you ashray, but you are no more our king, because the people don't want you to be king. It's a pressure from below. And then people don't stop in the month of August. The next month they continue, or jahan there are public institutions, there are jails, there are libraries, there are armories, everybody start attacking. So much so, jail में उन्होंने हमला किए. जेल में से जहां भी जितने नोबिलिटी थी, इमिग्रे थे, they assassinated all of them. They raped many people, and it was very brutal. Hundreds and hundreds of people were killed, and there was no. कई बार तो जेल में गरीब लोगों को भी मारा काटा गया. Lots of prostitutes were killed under the assumption कि भाई ये जेल में है, सबको मारना है. Then भीड़ का तंत्र जो होता है ना, it becomes very violent. We have to understand French Revolution is not all only high principles. It's extreme amount of gory violence on the streets, indiscriminate violence. So the point is, when in the society all these things are happening, what is the government doing? The king is no more in the power. The assembly is trying to get hold of its own power. Inside the assembly, you see that right and left झगड़े और शुरू होते हैं. Now the middle class, the Girondists try to do something, but they feel a pressure from left wing, the extreme left wing. So radicalization inside the assembly, it was now decided to overthrow the monarchy and to establish a republic in France. A new assembly would be elected and known as National Convention. So we don't want this assembly anymore. Let us go for a national convention, which will be a republic now, because the people want it. We want republic, no more constitutional monarchy. And that republic will be in the form of a national convention, which will be elected on universal adult suffrage, universal male suffrage, but anyway, universal suffrage. औरतों की अवस्था बड़ी बुरी है. Even during the best of the aspects of French Revolution, women have no rights. तो अलग बात है. So, but when it is universal adult male suffrage, what does it mean? No more property-based elections. We have discussed active citizens, passive citizens. That is all discarded. No more bourgeois. No more middle class control over everything. Everybody will be able to vote. अपने आप में ये बहुत radical चीज है. It has never happened in the past. On 22nd September, the monarchy finally came to end. France became a republic. It marked the beginning of a new calendar, year one of the republic. Apart from the abolition of the French monarchy, the assembly gave a call for every other kingdom to do the same. देखो, मजाल, जरूरत. All governments are our enemies. All people are our friends, because the war is already ongoing. So every other monarch in Europe is threatened कि भाई आप हट जाओ, सिंहासन खाली करो कि जनता आ रही है. ये तो बात है. किसने कहा था? दिनकर. So what started as a movement, not against the monarchy, now consumed the monarchy. Initially, on the 4th of August and very soon after that, the aristocracy खत्म हो गई थी. अब monarchy भी खत्म हो गई. As the revolutionary ideas and revolutionary enthusiasm propelled the revolution to Earth's Republican solution. Earth क्यों लिखा है पता नहीं. Anyway, with the fall of the monarchy, the revolution entered a new phase. It was still a war in Europe, which had to be fought, but for that, the revolution would now be more successfully organized. So people are creating violence because they want to safeguard the revolution. They want to strengthen the government, the revolutionary government, which will be able to solve domestic problems and bring victory in the war. दो ही problem है, domestic economic problem and victory in the war. ये कौन करेगा? Government, which is revolutionary government, and therefore that government has to be very strong. अब वो होगा. So that is the end of the first phase. So actual first phase ends over here. So what we have actually, these events, you do not need to remember at all, but understand what is the first phase. It goes to beginning of war, domestic radicalization and declaration of republic. This is the whole story, because of which this constitution is found to be non-working. Clear? Now we go to the second phase. This phase is the most notorious and the most violent, best known, and most sensational phase, the reign of terror, reign of virtue. यहाँ का hero or maybe villain, as you may want to pursue it, is Maximilian Robespierre. Maximilian Robespierre और उसकी कहानी है बात की, because France is under threat. So let us see that phase now. The second phase, the phase of radical republicanism. So what we had was the first phase, which was of constitutional monarchy. The second phase is radical republicanism. It goes for a very short duration. It is the shortest phase of almost 1.5 to maximum 2 years, not much more than that. Formation of National Convention, Republic is formed. We have seen that already. So, because we have abolished the monarchy, now you have convention, which will be forming a new constitution. The first constitution is discarded. So the radical members prevailed in the new convention. So it abolished the monarchy and declared the France as a republic. Regicide, राजा के खिलाफ मुकदमा शुरू होता है. In the month of December, they start the trial against the king in assembly itself. जनता देख रही है, and they bring the various charges. And one of the most important charge that is brought against him is राजद्रोह. किसने किया है? राजा ने ही किया. Ultimately, under that he is found guilty. Voting होता है. This is interesting. In this trial, there is a voting. How many find him guilty? How many find him non-guilty? And with a very narrow margin of 1%, the king is found guilty, and then he is executed. And he is executed where? With the help of guillotine or guillotine. You know guillotine? जानते हो guillotine को? So that is now becoming important. That was not the way executions happened in the past. In the medieval Europe, लोगों को मारने के तरीके अलग थे. If you are a very honorable person, you should have a very pleasant death. तो बड़ा सा हथौड़ा लेके या बड़ा सा एक्स सुनने क्या बोलते हैं? एक्स कुल्हाड़ी, बड़ी कुल्हाड़ी लेके सर काटा जाएगा. If you are the most noble person, otherwise your arrogance will be taken out, you will be trampled over, you will be burnt alive. ऐसे तरीके होते थे. So they were very torturous. मरते समय आदमी इतना परेशान, 2-2 घंटा 4-4 घंटा मर ही रहा है. It was not easy. Guillotine was a new invention, and it was touted as the most humane way of executing somebody without any torture. एक क्षण में आदमी खलास, उसको दर्द नहीं होगा. That was the idea. And again, it was said to be very enlightened way of execution because it does not discriminate between the rich and poor. सबको एक तरह मारता है. Methods are not different for rich and poor. सबको मारने का एक ही तरीका, सबको मारने का humane तरीका without torture. एक क्षण में आदमी खत्म. Very efficient way also. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands and thousands people were killed in these 2 years with guillotine. Guillotine was the surname of the person who designed this machine. But anyway, the point is, execution of the king was a big thing. It had a huge, tremendous impact on both France and entire Europe. The monarchy, which was there for 1,000 years, was now gone. The people outside France were astonished, and the monarch outside France were angry. How can this happen? राजा को रिटायर कर देते, कत्ल कर दिया. Just when he started his own career in 1774, he was a divine Kraitola. Within 20 years, he is dead. जनता ने काट दिया उसका सर. It was a huge thing. But anyway, it led to internal division and a failure of Girondin ministry. Now, what happened because of the execution of the king? Is that where to stop? तो यहाँ पे इंटरनल पॉलिटिकल डिवीजन राइट लेफ्ट वाला becomes exacerbated. Why? Because the Girondist, the middle class, they say now the objective of the revolution is achieved. Kranti khatam. We have changed. We have abolished feudalism. We have got rights. We have killed the king. We have got sovereignty. This is the end of revolution. But the other people, Jacobins, the Jacobin are nothing but mountains का एक support group था वो, that later on became, so Jacobin mountain comes interchangeably almost, although they are not technically, but हम उनको interchangeably use करते हैं. तो Jacobins, who were led by Maximilian Robespierre, wanted to give in lower classes a greater share in political and economic power. So the idea of lower class was that revolution is not yet over. It is still continuing. The objective is not yet achieved. हमें democratization चाहिए, welfare state चाहिए, गरीबों को property चाहिए. Then only it will be over. But Girondist से बहुत हो गया, अब रुक जाते हैं. So you have the internal political crisis. Jacobins actually है कौन? This Jacobins, the Jacobin club में बैठते थे, and they were actually trying to represent the Parisian mob. जो भीड़ थी, भीड़ का चेहरा जो था, वो Jacobins थे. तो उनके पास मसल पावर, जो चाहे वायलेंस कर सकते. This led to crisis. Economic crisis continued. The bread was not only dear, but it was also becoming scarce. The problem was simply this, that the assembly was not able to find a complete solution to economic problems. And that is the big thing. Unless and until those problems are solved, the radicalization will not stop. Janta will not be satisfied. हमारा खाना तो सस्ता हो. आप जितने चाहे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बनाओ, मोनार्की रखो ना रखो, में कुछ लेना देना है नहीं. हमारा खाना सस्ता कहाँ पे? भूख लगी. Fundamental point. So you see the reforms that, like, for example, I discussed about assignment, the paper currency that was brought by the assembly against the church property. Its value was falling and falling and falling. Which Jacobins were saying कि भाई देखो, will come, will control the grain trade, will intervene into economy, will bring the prices down. But Girondists were middle class. They wanted laissez-faire, free trade. So under free trade, they were not able to bring a lot of interventionist policies to control the inflation. So problem हो रहा. So we have the internal crisis of the food crisis and external crisis continuing. The war is again going, and in the war, seesaw chalta hai. In this phase, France is not doing well. So people are again afraid and angry. We need to do something. In this context, the people of France preferred almost emergency kind of government, but the weakness of the Girondist ministry compounded the problem. So, जरूरत किस चीज की है? Iron hand. What you get is a weak middle class government. It is not going to solve either internal or external crisis. So we have Jacobins took advantage. जनता के जो नेता है, they take advantage. They just come to the convention, they drag all these people out, they kill everybody. अब जनता ने ताकत ले ली. So we have the change in government also. The middle class people के नेता are assassinated, lot of them, and Jacobins take over the power. So this is the revolution के अंदर we have multiple revolutions ongoing again and again and again and again. चलता रहता. You never know where to stop. Once you open the Pandora's box, there is no stopping. So Girondin leaders were dragged out from the National Convention by the crowd of 20,000 Jacobin supporters and killed in broad daylight. Thus, Jacobin seized power in June 1793, and that was the beginning of the reign of terror. Ab, you have the most violent phase of revolution starting. Let me see, we have some comment perhaps. If the monarch-subject relationship in other kingdoms were different, perhaps beneficial to both, then why would the monarchy there fear the spirit of revolution? Why such insecurity and hysteria? You see, monarch-subject relationship can never be beneficial to both. If you presume that it was beneficial, then it is a very medieval thing. Monarch would not give you all the rights, liberty, equality, fraternity. ये आपको नहीं मिलेगा. You will not have the economic, political freedom completely as you wanted. Monarch is with the support of aristocracy all the time. Feudalism continues. हो सकता है, some people may feel they are better off in monarchy than in democracy, but that is just a subjective feeling. ठीक है? Come back. So Let us, now you tell me, what are the events we discussed so far? बताइए. तो इवेंट्स नोट्स देख के मुझे अभी बताइए हमने क्या क्या देखा पिछले 5-10 मिनट में. गुड. वी हैव नेशनल कन्वेंशन, देन रेजिसाइड, यस, दिसंबर के बाद 2 महीने में. देन yes, so we have a transition of power from Girondin to Jacobins, and therefore we have beginning of reign of terror. This is the name that we use for it. They never called themselves reign of terror. They called it reign of virtue. Terror भी उन्होंने use किया है. Rather they say reign of terror and reign of virtue both are required. Lower class. देखो जितना आपका क्लास नीचे का उतने अधिक आप वायलेंट होने की पॉसिबिलिटी ज्यादा है, बिकॉज यू आर लेस थिंग्स टू लूज, यू वांट मोर थिंग्स, आपकी जरूरत भी ज्यादा है. मिडिल क्लास आदमी वायलेंट नहीं होता बाय नेचर, बाय क्लास इंटरेस्ट. ही वांट्स टू सिक्योर द प्रॉपर्टी. मेरे बैंक में कुछ लाख रुपए हैं, मेरे एक फ्लैट, मैंने 20 साल लगा एक फ्लैट खरीदा है, एक 4 व्हीलर है, मैं क्यों तोड़ू, है ना. तो मिडिल क्लास इज नेवर वायलेंट. मैं इट ही कुड बी वायलेंट इन सम सिचुएशंस, but generally if you go by class interest, he is more cautious and conservative. It is the lower class which becomes more radical. DPSP versus FR. That's simple. So by July there was beginning of reign of terror, and it went on for 1 year. With this, the French Revolution turned bloody and violent. The revolution slipped out of the hands of middle class and went into the hands of lower class. It even has tarnished its own image in the eyes of other Europeans. It was an emergency form of government when terror was used as an instrument of enforcement of certain policies and particularly eliminate enemies of revolution. So emergency is both domestic and international. Revolution is very weak. So इस समय you have to use violence to survive. Now this is the most controversial aspect of the French Revolution. He was reign of terror good or bad? हजारों लोगों का कत्ल कर दिया, good or bad? But was it necessary? Was it unavoidable? And was there also some positive side to it? Again, the opinion is divided based on who you are. If you are middle class interest person, you will find revolutions ka this phase to be not very pleasant and unnecessary. And if you are coming from lower class, if you are ideologically more radical, you will find it is evil, but necessary evil. Jarurat thi. Your opinion about reign of terror will tell you more about yourself than about reign of terror. खुद को जानने का जरिया ये reign of terror है, समझ लो आप कहाँ पे खड़े हो. What were the instruments of the government through which this reign of terror was perpetrated? First of all, you have Committee of Public Safety, which was actually founded earlier, but now it came under the complete control of the Jacobins. It was nothing but actually the executive authority. सारे decisions यहीं से होते. They control legislature, they control judiciary, they control army. So it was charged with protecting the new republic against its foreign enemies, the first coalition, and domestic enemies, the royalists and emigres. As a wartime measure, it was given broad supervisory power over everything. It concentrated all the executive authorities. Committee of Public Safety, which kept everybody safe except people, except the public. Second thing, deputies or representatives were sent to the army to bring the army under control. Deputies were also sent to the various provinces to get their support. Revolutionary tribunal was established. ये tribunal रहेगा for the political trial of the offenders and enemies of revolutionaries. जो जो लगे एंटी revolutionary है उसके ऊपर मुकदमा चलाओ. Trial was very quick. 1 दिन में 2 दिन में खटाक से execution under the law of suspect. This law of suspect was passed, and in this law of suspect, who will be suspect, who will be eliminated, and who will be doing all these things. So greater power of surveillance were given to this Committee of Public Safety and Tribunal, so through which hundreds and thousands of executions were carried out. We have the law of maximum and law of minimum. We'll discuss this in detail later thoda sa. Law of maximum is about iske upar aapke daam hone sakte. So price ceiling was brought because these people are poor people. They want price control. They want food to be affordable. So food prices will not be increased beyond this point. Maximum is this. So price ceiling on food items and essential commodities. And then we have law of minimum for the wages. Wages iske niche nahi, minimum wage aayegi. So minimum wage and maximum food price. So law of minimum, law of maximum were brought. The policies of the government tell you wo kiske dam pe aaya hai government. In case of Robespierre, you see the law of maximum, law of minimum, you come to know that they're representing the interest of the lower class. Then you have Robespierre soon eliminated the other leaders, Dante, Herbert, etc., who were themselves, by the way, Jacobins. And that is very interesting that Jacobins, aane ke baad, within Jacobin, you have only one person who is powerful, Robespierre. Other Jacobin leaders were executed, eliminated, and he starts something called as one-man dictatorship. And this is very interesting. It was done in the name of the general will of Rousseau. Rousseau ka naam Robespierre bar leta hai. He gives, his couple of speeches are very important, but otherwise he writes also. He says it is all for popular जनता की आवाज. इसके ऊपर दबाना ही है, जनता को ही दबाना. So in the name of people, people will be controlled. In the name of people, one man will concentrate all the authority within himself. And that is very interesting. अब बात ये आती है, we had discussed this earlier also, that should Rousseau, we had discussed one question, Rousseau as the father of absolutism or dictatorship. Do you consider Rousseau as father of dictatorship now? Yes. Well, his thoughts definitely permitted some definitely gave some leeway for justification of violence by one on the many. We have seen the answer also, but I had discussed one more thing. As take for example Stalin. Stalin had executed hundreds and thousands of people. He had Stalinist purges after purges to kill people. Did you blame Karl Marx for that? Should Karl Marx be held responsible for the policies of Stalin? Nahi. The political leaders have their own autonomy and agency to some extent. They take their own decisions. Somebody came in the previous generation and gave some idea. Who said you to execute them? So as Karl Marx cannot be held responsible for the Stalinist policies, similarly, Rousseau cannot be held responsible and accountable for the policies of Robespierre. But Robespierre used Rousseau's ideas to justify his own policy. Ye hai irony. Is it clear? So we have to go and see what all this Jacobin government, the Reign of Terror, did. And here I will give you, this is the area of question in mains. Positive and negative, achievements and failure of the Reign of Terror. And depending on the way question is drafted, you will say, ki bhai stance kya lena hai? Because the question will be critical analysis. But if the statement is negative, your answer will start in the first half with negative and second half it will end with positive. But if the question comes with positive light and then says critically analyze, you will start in the first half with the positive achievement and end with the negative achievement. So aapko positive negative mein pehle kya lena hai, that will be determined by the way the question is drafted. We'll look at both the things. So let us begin. With the king dead and the church legally abandoned, the Jacobins under Robespierre's leadership committed the nation to a so-called reign of virtue and a complete obedience to Rousseau's idea of general will of the people, despite all the freedoms agreed upon in the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Sare Dr. Mack declaration sare khatam ho gaye. All the freedoms that were given in 1789 in the month of September are no more there. एक ही चीज है, वो क्या है? Complete subject. There is no freedom of individual. There is complete freedom of community. ये बहुत important बात है. In liberalism, The idea is the freedom of individual. In such kind of community-oriented ideology, it's about as a French people, you have all the freedom. But within that, individually, you have to submit yourself to the will of the community, general will. And to ensure that there will be use of violence as well. रूसो का सेंटेंस क्या था? A man must be forced to be free. That is what Rousseau said. Man must be forced to be free. Robespierre is doing the same thing. मैं आपको फ्री कर रहा हूँ आपकी सर काट के. So, at the beginning of the Jacobin terror, we have a new constitution coming up, the second constitution of 1793. It abolished the monarchy and established the democratic republic. You have universal male adult suffrage of all those who are beyond 21 and who can read and write. So you have the थोड़ा सा criteria of literacy also. It established the National Convention as the legislative body, which had unlimited powers to make laws and levy taxes, because you no more have the king. In the first constitution, the king continued to have a lot of executive power, right? याद है? Here, there is no king, so all the power now comes with legislative assembly. They can make any law. It guaranteed several social and economic rights, such as right to work, education, public assistance, etc. This constitution, unfortunately, or rather interestingly, is the most democratic one of all the constitutions that come during French Revolution. This is the most democratic, most forward-looking, most progressive, and unfortunately, it was never implemented. कभी समय ही नहीं मिला. It remained abortive ab initio. शुरू में ही वो implement हुई ही नहीं है. Why? Because the war is going on. There is reign of terror. They did not get any time. But if you want to look for the spirit of revolution, transforming into letter and structure, then the ideal example would be this one, this constitution. लेकिन कभी it was समय के अपने बहुत आगे थी. Anyway, so what was the positive contribution of the reign of terror? उस समय what all Robespierre could do in a matter of few months. The first thing, that Jacobin capture of power clearly defined why is the revolution being done? What is the objective of revolution? It is not just to create a bourgeois republic. It is not for middle class. It is for everybody. So we'll not stop with only middle class capturing power. So it was not just the overthrow of the monarchy and destruction of the old order. Rather, the spirit of revolution among the sans pullets. Sans chahiye. S is not pronounced, it is silent, but it is there. इसका मतलब होता है विदाउट. एंड कुलेट मतलब वो ब्रोचेस जो होते हैं यहाँ पे पहनते हैं वो, तो मतलब मिडिल क्लास अपर क्लास के कपड़े ना पहनने वाले, मतलब गरीब लोग. एंड पेजेंट्स एंड ऑल्सो अदर पार्ट्स ऑफ यूरोप हु वेर अंडर द सेम टायरनी. सेकेंड थिंग, it actually converted France into republic. So you have no more king, you have no more aristocracy. उनके जितने महल थे, उनकी जो जमीनें थी, जायदाद, प्लांटेशन, प्रॉपर्टी, बगीचे, बागान, everything is now confiscated. So ordered the confiscation of and the sale of property of all the emigres. When you do that, understand this thing well. Look at India's partition. During partition, we have people going from here to there and vice versa. But there was always a scope for undoing the partition for the initial time. अगर जो यहाँ से घर छोड़ के वहां पे गया, वो घर में खादी रखते, enemy property के नाम पे हो, जैसे भी हो, so that tomorrow if that person wishes to come back, he or she can come back and stay in the house. But the moment you dispense off with the property, आने के रास्ते बंद हो गए. Now you are going for irreversible change. Same thing is over here. The emigres had ran away couple of years ago. तब तक assembly did not do much, but now उनके सारी हवेलियां चली गई, सब कुछ चला गया. now वापस आते तो कहाँ आते? So now it is irreversible. Now it is republic. Now you cannot come back because there is a fear. If you come back, you will support the royalist, you will support the monarchists. हमें वो नहीं चाहिए, because you are counter-revolutionary force. Supported democratic ideas by introducing the universal adult male franchise. Churches were shut down and its buildings were being used as barracks and offices. The decimal system and new calendar were adopted. ये point actually नीचे चाहिए, गलती से ऊपर आ गया, तो ये बाद में लिख लेंगे. Then secondly, it encouraged welfareist ideas. Robespierre के समय, I have discussed already, we have the law of maximum and law of minimum, but that is not end of it. It is almost, there is no Marx, there is no industrial revolution. Still, it is a kind of socialist state that they want to create. Look at the reforms. It's a welfare state. It is almost socialist state, ensuring right to work and right to food. To control food riots and mass hunger in the cities, introduced the law of maximum, rationing of the meat and bread, etc. It taxed the rich people for, and then brought national assistance to the poor and the disabled. Disability is because of the war. आज की disability की बात नहीं है यहाँ पे. Abolish slavery and slave trade, despite slaves being very important for the plantation workers, plantations to run. Declared that education should be free and compulsory for all the males. So this is nothing but a complete socialist state. It was welfare state. So that's why people who support Robespierre, who support enough terror, look at this thing. These are very futuristic ideas. आज के दिन में ये बहुत आम है. उस समय it was unique in the entire world. Right to work, right to food is so futuristic. उसको establish होने में दुनिया भर में 200 साल लगे. 200 years after that. Even today, it is not yet established completely. नरेगा काम नहीं कर रहा है, and PDS भी बहुत दिक्कत देती रहती है. We're still trying to implement these French ideas. The system of military conscription was introduced, which was instrumental behind the military success of France. Now, this is a new thing. French not only created the Republic of the people, they also created the army of the people. From the age of 21 to 25, 26, mass conscription. इसको बोलते हैं आज के भाषा में, अमेरिकन लिंगो में they call it drafting, but in English, British English, we call it conscription. So compulsory military में आपको 2-4 साल काम करना पड़ेगा. Now that is a new instrument. You creating army, a huge army of almost 10 lakh people. 10 lakh की army आपने create की in a matter of few months. Everybody is trained and given weapons. And with this huge citizen army, ultimately you are able to win the war, the first coalition. And that is a new thing because Napoleon takes it even further, makes it even better. And after Napoleon, when he conquers entire Europe, rest of Europe starts following it also. So French Revolution actually created new ways of battle, new techniques of warfare, new strategies of logistics, and also entire new military doctrine was created by French Revolution. And उसका एक बहुत बड़ा part है conscription. Then culture, changing everything. रास्ते के नाम बदल दो, measurement system बदल दो. We want metric system and no more old system. We don't want even घंटे में 60 सेकंड क्यों चाहिए? It is illogical. We want to go for reason, rationalism. It should be decimal. घंटे के 100 सेकंड होने चाहिए. उसको डिवाइड कर दो. Calendars, oh, January, February, March, July, कौन है ये? July, June. This is all Christian. So because this entire January to December calendar is a Christian calendar. The terms have come from Roman Empire and a Christian history. So because it is a Christian calendar, जो हम आज उसको use करते हैं, but they were very radical. They were anti-clerical. They said we will not use this calendar at all. They brought a new words for different months: Fructidor, Thermidor, Brumior, Vendemor. नए नाम, क्योंकि चर्च का नाम नहीं चाहिए. And that was actually, we have a person, Pollard, who has said that the most fundamental assault on the church is change in calendar. Secularization का next level है. No more only the civil constitution of clergy, which happened in the case of the earlier phase, first phase. In the second phase, you destroy the calendrical system altogether, festivals altogether. So a new rational calendar was created. Jacobins transformed culture. Festivals celebrated patriotic virtue. Churches were turned into the temples of reason. The most famous church in the heart of France, Notre Dame. Notre Dame is a 12th century old church, cathedral, that was no more a church. It became temple of reason. हम तर्क की पूजा करेंगे अंदर जाके. And dishware were carrying patriotic mottos, and clothing was in red, white, and blue. Red, white, and blue was the tricolor of the French Revolution. उसी के कपड़े आपको पहने. It's a very emblematic of the sans culotte at that time. जहां जाओ रास्ते पे लोगों के कपड़ों के 3 रंग है: red, white, blue. The moment you look at that painting, you know it's a painting of French Revolution. उसके एक रंग बन गए क्रांति के उनके. And then you also, Paris Commune continued to exist in the city of Paris. They went even one step ahead in the attack on church. बोले per church one bell, एक घंटी sufficient है. बड़ी बड़ी घंटी होती है ना ऐसे घंटा. One bell per church is sufficient. Rest of the bells उठा के ले गए सारे, उसको मेल्ट कर दिया, उसके मन में कैनन्स एंड एम्युनिशंस और भेजे सीमा पे लड़ने के लिए. So you see, patriotism, nationalism is now pitted against religion. Why do you need so many bells? एक घंटे से काम चला लो अपना. वहाँ लड़ने के लिए तोपे चाहिए. You need metal. Now, how can anybody argue against it? If you pose the question in that way, you can't argue. So patriotism was used to destroy the power of the church. Secularism. That was done by Paris Commune. So these are all actually, and then you have Louvre Museum. Louvre जो हम आज भी जाके देखते हैं, वो पिरामिड कांच का बना हुआ है. Then you go underground. I've been to Paris. So it's, everybody knows Mona Lisa at least. But actually, Shashi Tharoor, Shashi Tharoor, he has talked about a London museum, a Victoria and Albert Museum and London Museum, in the context of India's artifacts which were looted by British and now they are in London. हमारे पास अपने खुद के artifacts नहीं है because we were colonized. So he calls it दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा चोर बाजार, London Museum. But उसका भी बाप Louvre Museum, उससे बड़ा चोर बाजार. Wherever they went, जाके कल्चर को स्ट्रिप करना, लूटना, पाटना, उनकी जितनी artifacts, just take them away and put them in your own museum. So even today, if you want to see your own culture, you have to spend money on that country, in that there, and then you get to see your own Purkhe. Anyway, whenever the restoration of artifacts happen, I don't think it will happen in our lifetime so easily. I think we also have to go and loot them only one day, perhaps. Who knows? Otherwise, nobody will give it back so easily. Recently, Benin artifacts are given back. Right? Actually, you don't follow museum history. There is a culture, civilization in Africa called Benin. उनके कई सारे मुखौटे जो थे लंदन में एंड अलग अलग जगह थे, ऑल ऑफ देम आर नो रेप, सब वापस भेज दिए. ये आपके आप रखिए. इट्स अ बिगिनिंग. It's a big beginning. So there is a possibility that within next few decades we might be able to claw back our artifacts. तो टिपू सुल्तान की तलवार वापस आएगी, कोहिनूर तो आना ही चाहिए वापस. क्यों नहीं आना चाहिए? ठीक है. The terror, the negative aspect. The terror came in various forms: political, economic, social, etc. These exceptional measures provoked violent reactions. These measures are literally exceptional. It took them long time to implement, but opposition to this was broken by reign of the terror. Now we have a quotation by Robespierre himself. He gave two speeches which are very popular, of which in one speech he gave this quote. He says, the basis of popular government in time of revolution, that is emergency, is both virtue and terror. Terror without virtue is dangerous. Virtue without terror is powerless. Terror is nothing else than swift, severe, indomitable justice. It flows then from virtue only. Virtuous बनना है तो terrorist बनना पड़ेगा. That is what Robespierre is saying. You have to use violence. So it is a dangerous thing, no doubt. So what kind of terror that was used? It was an alarming speech, no doubt. So with the same instruments like Committee of Public Safety, Revolutionary Tribunal, law suspects, guillotine, etc., the terror process was given institutional basis. ये हमारी process है, ये हमारे bureaucrats है, and it will be implemented. So it is rationalization of terror. It is efficiency-oriented execution of terror. The terror is bureaucratized. The emotions are taken out. It's only about process. Simply, to keep killing people. It's a machine. So violence, which was earlier considered the natural outrage of a frustrated mob, was now given a legitimate and institutional basis. Terror was bureaucratized. Then we have almost 17,000 people were guillotined, but total people which were killed ultimately is 35 to 40,000 based on various estimates. With a matter of एक साल में इतनी फांसियां दे दी. फांसी मतलब execution in guillotine. And it actually gave a very cruel face to revolution. And the revolution started to devour its own children. It's a huge thing. On one side, you have a very bright aspect of welfare state. On the other side, to execute the welfare state, you have to execute so many people. You know, in the name of people, you can do anything. And the name is like Committee of Public Safety, etc. Ye typical. I don't know whether you have read 1984. It's typical Orwellian. George Orwell करके लेखक था. It's Orwellian. Names are so bureaucratic. The process seems so natural, not so bureaucratic again, and the outcome is terror, violence. So name and work, both of this Committee of Public Safety, it's an Orwellian state. आप नहीं पढ़ा 1984 में. Anyway, it's an Orwellian state. And see, if you can kill the king, you can kill anybody. You start killing people indiscriminately, one after another. Unfortunately, and see, there are many great people killed. For example, Marie Antoinette. She is also now put to guillotine in the reign of terror. It goes to such an extent, ultimately Robespierre himself is executed on guillotine. तब जाके ये बात खत्म होती है. Robespierre को भी काट सर अपना जुदा करना पड़ता है तन से. But the point is, we have the background. People have done huge amount of research to identify who all were killed. And out of those 35, 40,000, if you go by the origin of the people, we come to know almost 85% of those who were executed belong to the third estate. They are not first or second estate, third estate only. So, Kranti अपने बच्चों को खाती है. It's very clear. It's very unfortunate also. If your enemy is aristocracy, you are eliminating them. It's a different thing. But you're eliminating your own people in the name of safeguarding them. Committee of Public Safety kept revolution safe, but not the people, not the public. It led to second aspect of the political terror was its complete distrust of women. Women were considered somehow dangerous for the revolution. They were found suspectful. तो उनके clubs, उनके hotels, उनके initiatives सब बंद करवा दी. It was complete. The city of Paris was full of spies. पता नहीं कौन वहां पे आपके ऊपर spy espionage कर रहा है. You don't know. Everybody is afraid, terrorized. And that this aspect of terror is actually so negative. The progressive people across Europe who till this point of time were supporting French Revolution now went against it. And we have one of the most important persons, the conservative voice, the very articulate conservative voice ki bhai dekho, if you bring revolution, ultimately it descends into chaos and violence. तो ये नहीं चाहिए. We don't want revolution. हमारे यहाँ भी progress होगी, भले धीरे धीरे हो. We'll take 2 generations to do what you do in 2 years, no problem. But will not destroy our systems. Our tradition is important. It's a very typical conservative thought of gradual change. And the most important voice was, anybody? In London, Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke, the Burkean thoughts. Actually, you should read his speeches and letters one day. He's epitome of conservatism. So Burke is now started to write and speak against the excesses done by this French Revolution, and he gets huge amount of fodder by this thing. कि बाकी लोग चाहते हैं. In other countries, the kings become either very oppressive to avoid such possibility, or they start accommodating changes. कि भाई ये दीवार पर लिखा सच हम मिटा नहीं सकते. अगर हमारे देश में कुछ आवाज उठती है, we'll accommodate. So, and you see the difference. In Britain, you have gradual change. When the Reform Acts come, Reform Act comes. The aristocracy accommodates middle class. No doubt. यहाँ पे नहीं किया तो क्रांति हो गई. Anyway, you have economic terror as well. The attempts to control the economy was inimical to the interest of the upper bourgeois, grain control, price control, everything. So traders would not like that. It created revolutionary armies. Now, these armies different. यहाँ पे you have 22,000 people in different provinces and districts just trying to find out who is breaking the principles of revolution, who is black marketeer, who is holding, who is doing all this corruption, and who is going for profiteering. पकड़ के. So the ideas of the revolution were implemented with iron hand by the goons on the street. They also wanted to give death penalty to the holders and black marketers. ये उनकी इच्छा थी कि भाई कोई अगर व्यापारी करने में पैसा कमाए उसको खत्म कर दो. But वो विश थी, वो हो नहीं पाया. And then there is religious terror also, attack on Christianity. As I said, there is anti-clericalism, but there is also some amount of anti-Christianity aspect. There is an attempt for de-Christianization, and new secular festivals were started. The Bishop of Paris was forced to resign. In Notre Dame, the celebrated Festival of Reason, it was converted into the Temple of Reason. And later on, Robespierre brought the worship of Supreme Being. So you have terror, KB, religious, economic, and the most important one, political aspect. Now the point is, it becomes unbearable after a point of time. Janta bhi hoti, siyani hoti. People tried to suffer it, tried to accommodate it for the time till when it was necessary. Till the time the economy was not under control and war required such kind of violence. But the moment war started to go little bit pro-France, people said, bahut ho gaya, inko hata do. So you have a reaction coming against the reign of terror itself. Reaction against Robespierre himself. In that reaction, who will be there? Royalist, yes. Emigres, thode se agar hai to bilkul. Middle class, they won't like this rule. But there is also additional thing, the peasants. They also don't like him. Why? It's because workers versus peasant hamesha mein conflict hota hai. Peasants want to sell the grains and earn money. So they want higher prices for the food grains in the market. The workers want the cheaper prices for the food grains in the market. They want price control. And the Jacobins were supported by the workers in the cities. It is their wishes that were followed. So peasants became anti-Jacobin. Unke dost kaun bane? Middle class. So middle class and the peasants came together. They perpetrated counter violence. If this is a red violence, they said, hum lange white violence. It's nothing but violence, but the terms that we give today. Red violence is the violence of Jacobins, white violence is the violence of middle class. वो भी उल्टा काटना शुरू कर दी, मारना शुरू कर दी. And that again brought the Robespierre down, ultimately. So the French, as French soldiers began to win the wars abroad, people became tired of excessive revolutionary bloodshed and mounted opposition. The victory in the war made the terror and economic and social restrictions seem pointless. In the end, there was a fierce reaction against this rule of Robespierre. He was overthrown on 27th of July 1794. In the language of the revolutionary calendar, it is called 9th Thermidor of year 2. So isko hum bolte Thermidorian reaction. Thermidorian reaction. Thermidor is actually nothing but name of the month in the new calendar. Aur kuch nahi. Okay. Thermidorian reaction, and he was executed the following day. Now the Red Terror was replaced by White Terror. So end of reign of terror is not the end of terror. ये समझो. ऐसे नहीं कि मिडिल क्लास लाया शांति लाई ना. End of reign of terror is end of Red Terror. Now it is replaced with White Terror. The Thermidorian reaction did not stop with only execution of Robespierre. It continues for many weeks afterwards. चुन चुन के पकड़ के हम सबको मारेंगे. So turn by turn मारते रहते लोग एक दूसरे को. It's a revolution. So the Red Terror of the Jacobins was replaced by White Terror of the Thermidorian reaction. Thus, terror did not end, but the Jacobin terror ended. Not only right, but the left also combined to demolish the government. It was not just the overthrow of the few persons, but the rejection of the system of maximum, minimum, ye wo sab nahi chahiye hame. We want to reject this entire constitution, entire national convention, entire system of government. It's not only against Robespierre in person, it's against the entire type of nizam ke khilaf baat chal rahi. Soon after his fall, the maximum was abolished, the social laws were no longer applied, and efforts towards economic equality were abandoned. So, again, depending on the question and where you stand, I will give you both the conclusions. If you are little bit pro-middle class and thoda sa anti-left, this kind of conclusion suits you better. Terror did not end. Red Terror ended, White Terror continued. It was a reaction against the whole system of government and welfare state to bring back the rule of middle class. But if you are thoda sa radical in your origin, in your nature, or the question gives the hint to have the radical answer, because the questions have never been asked, we don't know kahan se puchenge, is taraf se, hum dono ke liye taiyar hai. Then you go for a romantic kind of idea. Generally, if you go to Bengal today, if you go to Jadavpur University, Presidency College, etc., or even जहाँ पे leftist लोग होते हैं, they would prefer this conclusion. It was a broken dream. एक सपना था, ख्वाब था जो पूरा नहीं हो पाया. It was an attempt to create a democracy, but it did not succeed. However, the failure was not the last word. The dream would be realized much later after Russian Revolution. Terror notwithstanding, there was a positive side, the revolutionary government. देखो सिक्का है दोनों साइड में, टेरर भी है एंड पॉजिटिव भी है. अब किसको आप समझते हो प्राइमरी साइड एंड किसको समझते हो सेकेंडरी साइड, डिपेंड्स ऑन वेयर यू स्टैंड. A leftist today would consider the welfare state as the positive, important contribution, and terror as just some kind of aberration. And a middle class person today would see terror as the main aspect of it and the virtues as just aberration. समझ में आया? So one question, if at all expected, can be expected on the reign of terror. We have taken both the sides. We have clarity. Okay. So let us go to our chart again. We have seen the positive and negative. Then we saw the Thermidorian reaction, which brought down the reign of terror, the Jacobin government, and we have seen the reasons, or I would say, reason nahi, judgment. The judgments that we can give or we can pass on its nature. So now we have the idea of second phase also, from national convention की शुरुआत से convention के end तक. Is it clear? Any doubt, any query? We have comments. Indian artifacts in British Museum equal to Indian boost to British economy. Yes. Why did Robespierre, a supporter of mountains, become dictator and went in killing spree? Sudeep, the point here is the things we discussed over here. Radicalization increasing, economic problems are not getting solved, and the mob is controlling everything. Ultimately, you have to bring order, you have to force the order, you have to control the mob, you have to give them what they want, you have to fight the war. So you end up having one man's dictatorship. You have to enforce the order on the violence. अब उसके पर्सनल भी कुछ पॉलिटिकल आकांक्षाएं होंगी, वो तो अलग बात है. Let us move on. So only one question that is expected over here is reign of terror के बारे में judgment assessment. For that, you would just read the last page, not the entire chapter. But without this, you would not understand चल क्या रहा है. Now we go to the next part. Third phase. Now in the third phase, it is from 1795 to 99. We have no more reign of terror. We still have republicanism because you can't go back to monarchy immediately very quickly. So you have no monarchy, you have republicanism. But this republicanism is in the hands of middle class. So it is a moderate, the liberal republicanism. The phase one was constitutional monarchy. Phase two was the radical republicanism of reign of terror. And phase three is moderate, liberal republicanism. Middle class is back to the power. And here, the nature of government, there comes the third constitution, and nature of government is a form of directory. Directory मतलब वो किताब होती है ना फोन नंबर की, वो नहीं है. Directors है, there are 5 directors who are forming executive. So a group of 5 directors is called a directory. ठीक है. So nature of directory is actually elected by the people, therefore it is republican. So during this stage, once again, you have the middle class back to power. And I had discussed that now middle class is coming. Why it happened? Why there was fall of reign of terror? Ultimately, if I have to summarize, one thing is that the lower class was not strongly organized yet. There is no lower class party. There is no leftist party as such. They are just still a mob. Jacobin is also not a party. And secondly, the peasants went against the workers. The peasants collaborated with middle class. So sort of class alliance be problematic. Right? That is a very important insight from the long-term viewpoint, because this Karl Marx who would see again and again, I do not expect revolution from the peasants. Peasants control some property. They have the land ownership, so they are always backward-looking, reactionary, status quoist. जिसके पास जो खोने के लिए कुछ नहीं, we have nothing to lose but the chains. Who are those people? Only and only workers in the industries in the cities. Peasants have lands to lose. So peasants will never support reaction. That is Karl Marx the idea, but influenced by some historical evidence also. And we find that is untrue. In case of China, it is peasant revolution, Chinese revolution, communist revolution. So वो अलग बात देखेंगे, we'll see ahead जाते जाते. So now we have a new constitution, the constitution of year 3. And since, because Jacobin terror was found useless, here you have a bicameral legislation. देखो अब क्या होगा ना, हम फर्स्ट देखे, सेकंड, नाउ थर्ड, देन विल कम फोर्थ एंड फिफ्थ एंड सिक्स्थ आल्सो. टोटल 6 क्वेश्चन पूरी आती है. नाउ यू कैन नॉट मेमोराइज ऑल दिस. यार ये फर्स्ट में ये था कि सेकंड में वो था. नहीं करना है मेमोराइज, जरूरत नहीं. वी शुड मेमोराइज ओनली फर्स्ट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. थोड़ा थोड़ा आंसर में वही काम पा. एंड अबाउट अदर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशंस एक या दो चीज काम की होती है, दैट यू कैन मेमोराइज एनीवे व्हेन यू स्टडी द एंटायर स्टोरी. कॉन्टेक्स्ट के साथ वो एक दो चीज याद रह जाती है, बस उतना काफी. So we have bicameral legislation. We have 2 councils, Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha. The Rajya Sabha is called as the Council of Ancients or Council of Elders, and the Lok Sabha is called as the Council of 500. 1/3 of which retire every year. So, देखो, what the problem here is, 1/3 of these 500 people retire every year. Elections will happen every year. Every year elections is the problem for them. They get hobbled down because of that gradually. Executive power was vested in 5 directors, that is called directory. Earlier, there were different committees in charge of executive power. Earlier, matlab, before this constitution, like Committee of Public Safety, Committee of General, etc. अलग-अलग committee थी. अब committee खत्म, we have directory. The 2 chambers as well as the 5 directors all were elected by the people, but the suffrage was limited. Whenever middle class comes in, limited suffrage, property rights. That's why you see 1940, 1947, 1950 in India is miraculous. Nowhere, nobody in the world imagined that India can go with universal adult suffrage. What was the literacy rate in India in 1947? No, kitni literacy in India? 15-16%. So 84% illiterate people. 16% में literacy education नहीं है, वो sign करने आते हैं illiterate. In that kind of situation, poverty है, बहुत ज़्यादा poverty. Average span of life is 30 years, 32 years, etc. So ऐसे देश में you are unleashing universal adult suffrage was a huge thing. Everybody had told आप तो फेल होंगे, गारंटी है, दुनिया में कभी नहीं हुआ है. So nowhere in the world on the first day of democracy there was universal adult suffrage. हमेशा you go to Britain, you go to Europe, you go to America, you start with rich middle class, white people. Then you go to lower middle class, you dilute the property restrictions, then you do some more development, थोड़े पैसे आगे, थोड़ा अमीर, थोड़ा infrastructure बन गया, tax collect हो गया. Then you go for lower class brings in demands also. You have to go for welfare state. Once the lower class starts voting, they are numerous, their ideas start influencing policy, they require welfare state. पैसा अगर नहीं आएगा कैसे करोगे welfare आप? You need middle class, rich class for that. So point है कि the voting has always flowed from top to down gradually, and then in the end you have slavery also abolished, slaves and blacks also became voters, and finally at the beginning of 20th century 1910, 1920, 1930 women got voting. अभी 100 साल भी नहीं हुए औरतों को वोटिंग कार्ड, 100 साल भी नहीं हुए. Hardly आपकी दादी की माँ was the first woman in your family to try to vote. Bas. It's change that has just begun. The journey of history, we like to believe it's the history of giving more rights to more people. But that doesn't happen unilaterally or uniformly, unilinearly. थोड़ा आगे पीछे चलता रहता है. तो इंडिया के बारे में it was a miracle. यहाँ पे the middle class is back to power. Again, there is restricted voting right, limited suffrage to men who paid certain level of taxes. and it curtailed some of the social and economic rights because we can't go for such kind of radical welfare state. We are middle class people. Even today, नरेगा बंद कर दो, कौन बोलता है? मिडिल क्लास बोलता है नरेगा बंद करो, right? So this government is known as the rule by directory. Now we have to थोड़ा सा analyze the nature of this directory. It was back to the original principles of 1789, because that also was middle class. And now we had the interlude of lower class, which was violent and welfarist at the same time. Now you are back to middle class, back to the old values of 1789. Jacobin sympathizers viewed the directory as the betrayal of revolution. Ye to gaddari ho gayi. Why? Because they wanted everybody to have welfare and voting right. Everybody, economic rights, economic equality, right to work, right to food, everything. The rule of directory was also known as the bourgeois republic. It is very logical. Now, this republic had seen the excess that may happen because of the mob getting unleashed in the public. तो उनका पहला काम ये था, जनता को कंट्रोल करो, मॉब वायलेंस को कंट्रोल करो. हाउ टू डू दैट? सो wherever the mob comes in, उसको कंट्रोल करो. For example, in this government, the political parties were consciously discouraged because this Girondists, the Jacobins, etc., they were going towards party formation. उसको बंद कर दिया because political parties bring in mobs, public voice, वो नहीं चाहिए हम. There is no more rule of party, but a rule of one person gradually. But anyway, white terror was used to suppress the red terror. We have discussed that already. It was the restoration of the property owners' republic. Only 40,000 people constituted the political nation because only those amount of people fulfilled the voting criteria of property qualification. बस पूरे देश में 40,000 लोग मात्र वोट कर सकते हैं और सब उतने पैसे. Thus, it reflected a shift towards a more conservative and cautious approach of governance following the excesses and upheavals of the preceding years. So what happened to the Parisian mob? There are very few instances. This mob is now gayab. After the coming of directory, the Parisian mob, the sans-culotte, गायब हो जाते हैं. वो 1788-89 से वो रास्ते पे घूम रहे, टहल रहे मॉब की तरह. अब आते हैं 94-95 में आके. Now they are finally put into their places. They will come back again. But you know when? In 1830, 1830 में, during the next revolution. But that will be unsuccessful. They will come back again in 1848 revolution in Paris. They will come back again in 1870. 1870 में you have Paris Commune, a very violent thing, but very interesting. But they will put back into houses again. Then they will come back in 1960s also. जब जनरल द Gaulle को हटाया जाता है, Fourth Republic के समय. So there are instances in the history of Paris, history of world, when mob dictates things. तो 4 साल के लिए चले जाते हैं. तो अब the role of mob that we have seen since the beginning, ये popular revolution in the causes, तब से जो शुरू होता है, fall of Bastille वगैरह, अब जाके खत्म हो गए. Now you will see in the forthcoming story, there is no more mob. So we have some, if you want, I can give you some names of historians also who talk of the popular aspect of mob. For example, you have George Rood, or he's a very famous British historian. And उसने क्या किया बड़ा interestingly, he said mob is faceless and nameless, but is it true? Do we agree and don't know these people? He tried to go through all the records to identify individuals in the mob कि भाई ये कौन था, नाम क्या था, गांव क्या था, काम धंधा क्या, क्यों इसमें आया. So he tried to give the face to the mob. We have one more historian, Richard Cobb. These are relatively latest historians over last 20-30 years, 40 years at max. They have tried to identify the individual. Both of them are British. Both of them have done meticulous work to identify a mob. But again, we do not go into the history of from below to this extent, तो हमें इसकी जरूरत ज़्यादा नहीं पड़ेगी. But only point I wanted to underline, role of mob in the French Revolution is over with the beginning of the third phase. ठीक? We go to the rule of directory. Now, even in this aspect, the rule of directory, we will not be required to write on directory के बारे में क्या अच्छा क्या बुरा. That question will not come. As in the case of the second phase, the only possible question was reign of terror का assessment, necessity, historical, positive, negative, सब कुछ. Similarly, in the case of the third phase, the only possible question is the conditions it created for the rise of Napoleon. Because the fourth phase is the phase of Napoleon. तो हमें देखना यह है कि why and how Napoleon could rise, what were the conditions that were there in the era of directory. We look at history of directory from only that perspective, ताकि अपना आंसर वहां से निकल जाए. ठीक है. So according to David Thompson, the directory was ill-fated from the birth. जन्म से वो अपने यहाँ पे एकदम बदनसीबी का नाम लिख के आए थे वो. It faced internal unrest, a weak economy, and expensive war. They had the legacy of a lot of problems which they could not solve. Ultimately, they failed because of internal problem and external problems both. For example, it tried to follow the policy of politics of balance. सबको खुश रखे, थोड़ा इनको थोड़ा उनको, ऐसे काम नहीं होता. In the politics of balance, ultimately they did not want to go for welfare state that level. It led to the gradual exclusion of people. Mob गायब हो गया, voting rights गायब हो गए. So जनता गायब हो गई. And जनता जब गायब हो जाती है, it becomes radical gradually. You can't see it, but we'll see it in the very end कि भाई हमने क्या गलती कर बैठे. But here you will see that they wanted to restore the politics of possessing classes. Thus, there was gradual exclusion of the people. It led to the popular discontent against the directory. Secondly, they themselves were extremely inefficient, extremely corrupt, and ineptitude, nepotism, etc. And therefore, they could not focus on solving the problems on the war front and on the economy front. And 5 लोग हैं, you will see within next 3-4 years बार बार उसमें एक ही आदमी कॉमन रहता है स्टार्ट से एंड तक, सारे बाकी बदलते रहते हैं. So even this directory is not very stable. The war was still ongoing, which demanded their major attention. Somehow there is a historian called Tim Lanning. I will not give the name, don't write it. Tim Lanning has said that we have these people on the directory who are now extremely intent on taking the revolution. वो जहाँ revolution में बहुत ज़्यादा aggressive हो जाते हैं, and that exacerbates the internal problems. The war also meant the continuous need of furnishing supplies. The currency had all but disappeared. The directory tried to reintroduce the metal currency because the assignment, the paper currency, was completely gone. It was having no value at all. It made possible because of certain conquests which were made during the period, particularly campaigns in Italy. So Italy में जाके, who was the leader there? The general was Napoleon. This Napoleon's very famous, very popular, and extremely miraculously successful Italian campaign brought huge amount of land and plunder for France. उसके बलबूते पे they launched a new metal currency. Although the directory repudiated most of the assignments, the old paper currency assignments, and the debt, it failed to restore financial confidence or stability. The price continued. उसके बावजूद they were not able to solve the economic problem. And the war soon certainly went in favor of France, but it increased the dependence of the directory on the army. Now, directory was actually a weak entity. It could stay for so long only because of the war and success in war by Napoleon. And the internal चीजों के लिए gradually it became dependent on army. So directory मतलब civilian power कम होती गई, and civilian power became dependent on the military power. That was the problem. उसके वजह से Napoleon got a chance to rise. There was a fear of both counter-revolution and increasing radicalism. So एक तरफ right wing का धोखा है, एक तरफ left wing का धोखा है. बीच में बैठा है middle class. थोड़ा इधर थोड़ा उधर. Right wing मतलब immigrants, aristocrats, those who want monarchy back. Middle class doesn't want that. Left wing मतलब lower people, right to work, right to food, distribution of property. If everybody gets voting right, middle class doesn't want that also. And both these sections are getting angry and radical. और वो दोनों धीरे 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 बगावत शुरू करते, मिडिल क्लास बीच में फंसा रह जाता, and then it becomes more and more dependent on army and Napoleon. That is the whole context. That is the idea of failure of directory. The elections, which came increasingly every year, returned both loyalist deputies and Jacobin deputies. Loyalist matlab pro-monarchy, Jacobin matlab pro-left-wing, in increasing numbers. So the directory at a level was always waged between the royalist fear and the fear of Jacobins. It limited options of the directory. The directory failed to bring France out of continuing chaos. It led to rise of Napoleon Bonaparte during the Italian campaign, which brought the directory into some kind of semantic, not semantic, it should be symbiotic. Sorry. Symbiotic relationship with him. They would increasingly depend on Napoleon and on the generals, in a manner of speaking, in order to sustain themselves in power against the various coup d'etat. Coup d'etat matlab revolutions. Coup matlab revolutions. So we have few certain examples. One example is coup d'etat of Vendemiaire. ये नाम याद मत रखना, वेंडेमेयर क्या है, महीने का नाम है कैलेंडर में. These names are used because it was that calendar that was used at that time. We have seen Brumiere. No, we have seen Thermidorian. The Thermidorian reaction brought the second phase to end, right? Now we have revolutions against the third phase. वो जिस महीने में होते हैं वो नाम उनको मिलते हैं. So we have, for example, coup d'etat of Vendemiaire, October 1795. Royalists were uprising. There was some reason, some election issue, etc. Ultimately, to suppress that. आया कौन? Napoleon. A very famous painting of Napoleon. Napoleon Paris के street में खड़ा है, cannons लेके दोनों तरफ. The cannons are firing on the crowd. सामने सारे लोग मारे जा रहे, काटे जा रहे. Napoleon's muscle power saved the directory from collapsing. Then you have left-wing revolt at this time. It is called conspiracy of equals under a person called Babeuf. Babeuf later on becomes a very famous proto-communist in the communist literature. But here he tries for some conspiracy that there will be a simultaneous revolt in all the provinces. But before it could happen, it is found he and other people are captured and executed. So they are gone. So it's a failed uprising. Like गदर का कैसे इंडिया में हुआ था, गदर रिठाव करेंगे, नहीं हो पाया, पहले ही पकड़ लिया. Similarly, then we have coup d'etat of 18 Fructidor. Again कोई और महीना है. So September 1797. Again you have a royalist coming to election. उनको दोबारा दबाया जाता है. So we don't need to go into the stories. आपको Fructidor याद में रखना है. You don't have to remember anything. Just understand one simple thing. Against directory, on the left wing, on the right wing, continuous uprisings are happening. These are just the examples of those uprisings. So, for example, Fructidor coup d'etat and this Vendemiaire coup d'etat, both of them are the attempts from the right wing to suppress, to capture the power. And conspiracy of equal shows the radical people again trying to get the power. In sub में, who supports directory? Napoleon Bonaparte. So it never had a strong base of popular support. The directory never had a strong base of popular support. When elections were held, most of its candidates were defeated. After 1979, Jacobin deputies returned in a very large number to the Council of 500s. Without a majority in the legislature, the directors relied on the army to enforce decrees and extract revenue from the conquered territories. Generals like Napoleon and Hubert were now central to the political process, while both the army and directory became notorious for their corruption. So you ultimately have the fall of directory. So again, to summarize everything, why did it fall and why Napoleon could rise? The first reason is we have the increasing internal weakness of directory in the France. So it was inept and corrupt. Economic crisis continued. Coffers of the state were empty, and there was threat from royalists and Jacobins. It was the multifaceted crisis. So मैंने जो अब तक पूरा सारा बताया आपको, उसकी ये summary है in one paragraph. And there are around 40 words. In an answer, you get only this much space to write. In 40 words के अंदर ही आपको लिखना है. तो if you want to add, बस example लिखना है आपके. For example, 18th Fructidor. बस लिखना इतना ही है. That much of the scope you get, not more than that. Lefebvre, the famous Marxist historian, has used the term inner necessity. So you have to now take your answer में ना ये facts आप लिखोगे, 4 facts है, 4 reasons. If you want to write 20 marker, then make sub point of each of them, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, ठीक. Dependency, election, सब कुछ लिख दिया आपने, 4 point, half a page is gone. But then you have to, or maybe 3/4 of the page is gone. You have to go to next level of adding some kind of ideological context, some kind of perspective building. There you use Lefebvre. Lefebvre would say that there was a need to close the revolution. खत्म कब चली रही है? First phase, second phase, third phase, रुकेगी कब revolution भैया? Generation जाने आई. So indeed, it was the inner need, inner necessity that drove the revolution to dictatorship, and not for the first time. It is the inner का मतलब क्या है? ये सारे problems जो अंदर के हैं. So there is a need to find a strong person who will control everything and resolve the problems. And not for the first time, he is indicating it has happened earlier also when Jacobins. In the case of Jacobins also, we had led to one-man dictatorship, Maximilian Robespierre. उस समय भी crisis चल रहा था, तब जाके कहाँ solution मिला, but it did not survive. Now you have a next solution again. Ultimately, you have to go for dictatorship only to कहीं तो जाके रुकेगा. So thus the directory collapsed because by 1799 many preferred the uncertainties of authoritarian rule to the continuing ambiguities of parliamentary politics. लोग खुद परेशान हो गए with revolution and democracy. What excessive democracy when we are not prepared and there is no evolved political culture. It's a problem. It's a chaos. It's anarchy. उससे अच्छा एक आदमी आए कंट्रोल करे. We want stability now. We don't want freedom. Stability, बस. And that is the condition that Napoleon was willing to offer. Napoleon was the army general. Pakistan में you have 4, so far 4, and now 5 जो चल रहा है secretly. Army rules. Same thing here, army rule. That is Napoleon rule. The French people fed up with the weak directory rule. They wanted a strong regime to resolve their domestic issues as well as protect French people from the foreign powers. It was the discontent against the directory coupled with the increasing importance of army which prepared the ground for rise of Napoleon. Napoleon had already by that time became a very popular person. He had conquered Italy and provided huge amount of wealth to France to solve the problems. But then he went to Egypt. और जब इजिप्ट में जाके आया, बोला ये क्या कर दिया? I had given you so much money, so much stability, so much prosperity. I was gone for just a few months. I come back, you have destroyed everything. We have a very Napoleon ने अपने दोस्त को एक quotation, दोस्त को बोला था खत में, वो available no quote of Napoleon. He says, in what sort of state did I leave France and what sort of state do I find it again? I left you in peace. I find war. I left you conquest and the enemy is crossing our frontier now. I left you our arsenals full. I do not find a single weapon now. I left you the millions of Italy and I find spoliating laws and poverty everywhere. Napoleon to a friend while coming back from Egypt. So it was this inner necessity that drove Napoleon to take revolution, to find a strong man and a strong government then. So हो क्या रहा है यहाँ पे? If I have to go back to the class analysis once again, it is the middle class which wanted stability, which tried to get stability through directory, could not get it. Then they find the next solution is in the form of dictatorship. So middle class is looking for stability. It is looking for the consolidation of the gains since 1789 till 1999. 10 साल की cycle है. In those 10 years, emigres have gone by. Church property is confiscated. So this middle class actually has profited, benefited out of the revolution. They want to now stop and consolidate the gain. जो मिला है रखे अब बहुत हो गया. तो कैसे रखेंगे? We want dictator come. ठीक है? Jacobins earlier wanted a democratic dictatorship, like in the case of Robespierre. But what they got in 1799 was a bourgeois dictatorship. But it was too late for them, and the resistance was almost impossible. It was now widely believed that Napoleon could be the savior to save France from the royalist threat, European invasion, and Jacobin danger. He, in short, became the bulwark of the society. हम आपको सुरक्षा देंगे. वरना फ्रांस खतरे में है. So the revolution that happened is called as the revolution of 18 Brumaire. अब बहुत नाम हो गए, हमने 4 नाम देखे अब तक, थर्मिडोरियन, वेंडेमेरे, प्रुक्टिडोर, ब्रूमियर. बीच वाले 2 भूल जाओ. थर्मिडोरियन रिएक्शन याद रखना इसलिए है because that brought down the reign of terror, that ended the second phase, and 18 Brumaire will end the third phase. So we have to remember that as well. So second phase ended with thermodynamic reaction. The third phase, the rule of directory, ended with the revolution of 18 Brumaire, मतलब नेपोलियन का पावर में आना. ये 4 महीनों के नाम है, बाकी कुछ नहीं है. So what was the coup d'etat of 18th Brumaire? The architect of this end to its end was Abbassius. We have seen him since the beginning. Padri hai, but important leader. He became one of the directors, and then with the help of some other like Talleyrand, Napoleon's brother Lucien Bonaparte, etc., he ultimately got Napoleon in the directory. So that is what it happened. On 9th of November, the coup d'etat of 18 Brumaire replaced the 5 directors with 3-member French consulate. So directory is gone, the consulate has come. And it is member of 3 people, 3 consulate, which consisted of the 3 members, Napoleon, CS, and Ducasse. Napoleon in 1799 said कि यहाँ चलो ठीक है. Actually हुआ क्या यहाँ पे ना? It's like Plassey. In Battle of Plassey, if you remember very well, हुआ ये था कि the mercantile community like Jagat Seth, Omi Chand, Mir Jafar, etc., they thought that they are using British to get the power, which they did. Clive came in, Clive supported them, and then Clive ने game उल्टा कर दिया, उस चाल उल्टी चल गया. Clive got the power from the same thing happened over there. You have 2 revolutions within 1 revolution, 2 coup d'etat within 1 coup d'etat. In the first coup d'etat, this Abbassian people got help of Napoleon to remove the directory. Immediately afterwards, Napoleon removed these people also. He got all the power. समझ गए? तो ये double है. So one was devised by politicians when they thought of using Napoleon to come to power, but the second was executed by Napoleon. The Napoleon क्यों है? By Napoleon. विशेष होंगे पहले दो नहीं लगता. By Napoleon, then he turned tables on the politicians of the directory and arrogated all the power to himself, and he became the council for life. So in 1799, he becomes first council, and then this thing is gone. The old constitution is gone. We have a new constitution, the 4th constitution. And it is supported with the help of plebiscite is a tool, Janta ki Awaaz. Napoleon uses that very well. So he has gone to the people, and the people have voted very positively for him becoming council and removing directory. So we have a new constitution which is approved by people. Then after a couple of years, he says, I am no more a council, I am council for life. No more, I will no more be elected. Zindagi jab tak main zinda hu, main rahunga. Again, the 5th constitution is brought. And that also with the plebiscite accepted by everybody. Janta ko chahiye Napoleon. After 2-3 years, Napoleon says, I am no more council for life. I am the emperor of France. Ab main France ka raja hu. The new dynasty, the Bonaparte dynasty is now ruling. Again, a new constitution comes in 1804-05. That goes to plebiscite. Janta bhar bhar ke usko, yes, thumbs up. Hooray. So it is the people now who want stability. So Napoleon himself in 3 stages: council, first council for life, and emperor. He brought 3 constitutions. All 3 went for plebiscite. All 3 were accepted by the people. But वो कहानी थोड़ी कल वाली हो जाएगी. पहले यहाँ पे आते हैं. So Tocqueville had long ago said that there were 2 ways in which the revolution could be brought to a close. One, through personal interest, and second, through national glory. And he commented neither led to liberty, but both to Napoleon Bonaparte. Ultimately, revolution का end कब होता है? So historians consider 1799 as the end of revolution. Third phase खत्म होती है. Napoleon comes to power. Technically, that is the end of revolution. Many historians. Napoleon will now come. He will take some aspects of revolution and he'll reject some other aspects. So he is going for eclectic choice based on the need of the time. And then those aspects which he accepted, he will conquer entire Europe and enforce them on the Europe. So revolution continues to proceed. बट यहाँ पे ये मेन साइकिल है अंदर का खत्म हो जाता है 10 साल का. यहाँ से अगेन द मोनार्की बिगिंस and continues for next 60-70 years. The revolution is completed. It started with Bourbon, ended with Bonapartes. From monarchy to monarchy. But coming back to the 18th Brumaire का significance, why are the people supporting Napoleon? You have to add some historiography here. We can't just rely only on the facts कि directory में problem थे. I gave you one idea of the view of Lefebvre. Inner crisis necessitated rise of a strong man. अब उसी को मैं थोड़ा आगे ले जा रहा हूँ. We have an अलग historian called John Tullard. He has wrote a book, The Myth of the Savior. थोड़ा सा लेफ्टिंग है ये भी, but ठीक है. So he says that faced with internal and external dangers, the French bourgeoisie always succeeded in inventing a savior. In his book, it suggests that Napoleon was a savior that the bourgeoisie had invented to protect themselves against the two-pronged threat of internal and external danger. Property बनी है रहे, war में जीत जाए और हम लोग sustain रहे. So why did the bourgeoisie want to do it? The sale of the confiscated property had helped the bourgeoisie. Many upper and middle level of the bourgeoisie had benefited from the revolution by indulging in trade, in speculation, to the purchase of the land, and now they wanted the revolution to stop. To the successful हम जब शुरू किए थे a few years ago, we started with demand of enlightenment. हमें शिरकत चाहिए सत्ता में. अब मिल गया रुको. ठीक है. So, and they now wanted the revolution to be brought to a successful. If it goes beyond this, then the power will go out of our hand to the common people. हमें वो नहीं चाहिए. It was an alliance between the bourgeoisie and a part of the peasantry. They could now do this around one man and the one principle. One principle was already known, principle of property, and one man was now found, Napoleon Bonaparte. That is the story of the coming of Bonaparte to power. But जब ये सब चल रहा है, from the 1792-93 onwards, when the first coalition war begins, till 1799, story of 6 years, there is also a parallel story in the second and third phase, the Thermidorian reaction, the Jacobin terror and directory rule. ये जब चल रहा है, parallel to those 7 years, we also have a story of rise of Napoleon. Napoleon कहाँ से निकला था, कहाँ से ऊपर आया. That story is also very fascinating. वो हम कल देखेंगे, आज नहीं देखेंगे. ठीक है. Because again, if I start the story, it will not end like this. So I cannot start and then stop in between. Sir, there any nominal head of the state during age of directory? So it was 5 people who were ruling together. Okay. I discussed no all these factors. अरे मैंने 5 कारण बताया आपको. एक तो वॉर चल रहा था, खुद करप्ट थे, दे डिपेंड है ना, मिडिल क्लास थे, यहाँ पे रॉयलिस्ट का उठाव हो रहा था, यहाँ से जैकोबिन आ रहे थे, दे डिड नॉट हैव दी प्रोग्रेसिव पॉलिसीज. सारी बात, इतने सारे बताए 5 चीजें आप. ठीक है. प्राइमरीली इंटरनल एक्सटर्नल क्राइसिस को सॉल्व नहीं कर पा रहे थे. पीपल वर गेटिंग एंग्री एंड देयरफॉर दे बिकेम फर्दर एंड फर्दर वीक. बिकॉज इन एवरी इलेक्शन इन लेजिस्लेचर उनका पावर कम होते गया और बाकी लोगों की संख्या बढ़ती गई. डायरेक्टरी कंट्रोल्स एग्जीक्यूटिव, बट आफ्टर अ पॉइंट दे डोंट कंट्रोल लेजिस्लेचर. हाउ विल दे पास द लॉज विद द हेल्प ऑफ आर्मी? समझ में आया? So the political power, political base, they were, first of all, they were not popular. Middle class was never popular. बस अपने सोचता है, बहुत छोटा होता है. And secondly, they did not have political base, and now they did not have the political power also. But still they continue to hang on. ठीक है? Okay. Any other doubt? Any other query? अगर नहीं query तो यहीं पर रुक जाते हैं हम आज. 20 मिनट्स है, लेकिन हम कहानी शुरू बीच में खत्म नहीं कर पाएंगे. ठीक है, चलो दिन. थैंक यू. Only two questions expected on this. First is the assessment of reign of terror. Second is the weakness of directory creating conditions, the inner contradiction that led to rise of Napoleon. बस only two questions. बाकी सारी facts ज्यादा रटो मत, समझो कहानी की तरह, then let it go. I actually had a choice not to give these things in writing, but just to tell in the class as a form of story. But then I thought कि ऐसे में होगा नहीं, थोड़ा रहे रखो अपने पास नोट्स में, क्या दिक्कत. चलो then. Okay, bye.